Imagine reading curated opinion pieces that aim to help us better understand policy and politics from the people closest to it, or sometimes people who want to be far from it. We offer political insights without the limit of column inches. Introducing Quotes by Air Quotes Media, creators of the Herle, Burley, and Curse of Politics podcasts, where we bring politics from the inside out. And now with Quotes, you can read from contributors like Jim Coyle, Jim Stanford, and Kathleen Wynne, with more to come. Read Quotes at airquotesmedia.com/quotes.
Greetings, you admirable, you damnable, accursed. Herle here with an announcement. We're down a strategist for this episode. Jordan Leichnitz is here, Kory Teneycke is here, but we are Scotless today on the pod because Mr. Reid is spending the week teaching a rather intensive course on government communications in the Master of Public Administration program at the Queen's School of Public Policy. But being the comms guru that he is, Scott has a personal message he wanted me to convey to all you accursed. Scott cannot be here this week. He is on a mission because he is very, very brave. We know this means the pod will fail. He is the one truly essential ingredient. The fucking in our fucking fantastic job, everyone. Refunds will be made available should you wish. Once again, Scott is very sorry that Scott cannot be here. He is the best, and the best looking. Also, avid listener and number one fan of the pod, Jacques Rechin, can relax because there will be no mimicry today. All right, here's what we got on tap today. The Alberta Election.
If there's no mimicry, I'm
It's going to be a quiet podcast because I've lost my voice. And,
I know.
And we've lost Scott. So, it's going to be a lot of Jordan and David today, I think.
It's excellent. My moment has come.
Well, we're going to cover the Alberta election, which kicks off today. And we're going to talk about the freshly resolved Peace Act strike. And we've got a cursed clipping from Stephanie Levitz and Robert Benzie's excellent piece in The Star on the growing rift between Pierre Poilievre and Doug Ford. And then, of course, the great Mr. Pinsent will be along with our Hey Yous. Kory, Jordan, feels like we're missing a limb today. Tell us about how you're doing there, Kory. You've got the bad voice.
Yeah.
What's going on?
Yeah, it's a chain. I think it might have started with Dennis Matthews' kids to Nicole, and from Nicole to me. Yeah, so
it's Dennis Matthews' problem. It's Dennis Matthews' fault.
All infections come from school. Is my belief.
Can confirm.
At least it was the case with my kids. So I don't have the same level of petri dish with high schoolers that I did with preschoolers. Or elementary schoolers, but you still get a lot of ailments coming in through the school.
We should shut those things down.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I know my kids.
It'd be great when we did that.
Yeah. No, it's better for everyone if they're at school for sure.
All right. So, by the way, speaking of Scott Reid, it was his birthday yesterday.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And he didn't come here for us to sing to him.
I know. No, it's his birthday, and he blew us off for some prestigious academic gig. What a
With
snob.
friends like these, David.
Exactly. Okay, so I thought we'd start with Alberta and the election being called there today. So as I see it, from my vantage point, reading the polls and reading the analysis, it looks like it's extremely close. But the edge is to Danielle Smith and the UCP at the moment as we start the campaign. And the UCP edge seems to have been, if you look at the polling aggregators, if you look at the polling data, looks like the UCP edge has been growing slightly in recent months. Kory, why do you think that is?
Well, I think a couple of things. First of all, I think Smith has been tighter in her messaging. Like there have been some miscues and some mistakes there, but if you're comparing her performance over the last few months to her performance over the preceding number of months, she's been much tighter. They've had a much clearer message track. I think she's been helped a bit by some things coming outside of the borders with the federal government. Whether it's talking about revisiting legislation from the 30s on resource issues, or whether it's the just transition These are gifts from Ottawa to the Smith campaign, which have been helpful in helping bring it to a framing that's favorable to her ballot. And then I think you're starting to see the effects of various advertising campaigns by the political parties. And as we've discussed before, I think there's a much clearer message track in the advertising for Smith than there is for Notley, who has to try to sell a more nuanced message as opposed to a very clear economic, very binary message that I think is available to Smith. You can say whether it's bad luck or bad policy. I think it's probably more fair to say bad luck that you saw an energy crash during the Notley regime and the economy tanked, and people remember that, and we can talk about whether that's fair or unfair or whatever. I would say probably more unfair than fair, but you pay the price for that in terms of how people remember your time in office. So I think it's a combination of all those things that are coming together to give her some momentum from what she had before. A few months ago, it looked like an almost certain defeat, and now it looks like odds are in her favor. So, I think the challenge for them is to just keep doing what they've been doing, and hope not to have too many candidate mess ups or things coming from the NDP war room that trip them up. And I imagine there's a lot of potential things out there to trip her up. So I think the campaign is going to be very meaningful. I think it's going to be a very exciting election, and I'm really looking forward to watching it.
Jordan, it feels like, by the way, Kory, that was great. That was great. That was great opening analysis. Jordan, it feels to me like there's a higher threshold for Notley to meet than Smith in this battle for Calgary, because it feels to me like, and I'm just sort of extrapolating from what I see in the polling data over time, that for many, many people in Calgary, a Conservative vote remains the default vote. And it feels to me like for Notley to win, she has to be great and Smith has to be bad. Whereas for Smith to win, Smith only has to be fine.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, I think that's largely accurate in many parts of the city, and there's no question that the NDP has a bigger hill to climb here than Danielle Smith does, and I think everybody acknowledges that coming into the election. I mean, my read on it is, building a little bit off what Kory has said, is that the main piece here is about how voters view leadership in this election. If this becomes a referendum between Danielle Smith's leadership and Rachel Notley's leadership, then the edge goes to Notley. There's no question. I think voters are not particularly interested in more chaos, division, negativity, and some of the negatives that Smith has had tied to her and maybe arguably tied to herself. But if it comes down to questions purely around affordability and things like that, economic management, then I think you're going to see the edge go to Smith, which is actually, and of course we've also talked about in the past about how important the healthcare issue is in this campaign. And, New Democrats have been really, again, very disciplined on that message. And I was interested to see that Danielle Smith herself was out arguing over the last week that Conservatives should be taking on the healthcare issue head on, seemingly wanting to replicate some of the success that Ford has had in Ontario on that. I'm not sure it translates, but it's interesting to see her dabbling in that. I think that one of the things that I had an eye on over the last week, so, Smith has been quiet. Her team is doing a good job of hiding her as much as can be done in the immediate lead up to a campaign. And I think that, as we've talked about before, that's the right strategic move when that's your principle. But she still managed to be photographed with three people facing charges for the convoy in the last week. And this stuff is not in and of itself, as we've seen, she survives these moments, but it really is detrimental because you're painting the picture of somebody who, even though she may not espouse those extremist views herself, and we can debate about that, but repeatedly cozying up to folks who do, I think puts big questions in voters' minds around competence and whether she herself is a moderate or an extremist, and where does she sit there. And I think that could hurt them in Calgary.
So
I wonder if it isn't largely baked in, though. There's been so many stories and so much narrative around that at this point. To what extent is that something that the electorate has already factored in how much, unless there's something that's particularly new, her cozying up to those folks is not news. I do wonder about the Take Back Alberta movement. There's I think some justifiable fear within the UCP ranks that if they jettison those folks to too great a degree, that they start a large brush fire within their party. It's almost like there's a party within a party operating there right now.
It's the waffle movement.
And it's
I can tell you how that goes down.
It's a pretty bloodthirsty little movement that has racked up a lot of political heads on pikes over the last while. And it's got to be a concern for them, and not just a concern that lasts during the election campaign. I think that one probably continues on after the election. Like, I would say that there's a non-zero percent risk that even if Smith wins the election, that there isn't going to be a leadership challenge within the party ranks.
Well, the party may be ungovernable at this point.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Right. If they feel she's not, pure enough to their liking, that you don't have within their party structure a mechanism there to depose them. Like, look, it's hard to imagine that they wouldn't be better off electorally with Jason Kenney as their leader right now. Yet he is not there, and he's not there because of those folks. So, like, it's something that we waffle movement is sort of, probably the best analogy, but I think it's something that we haven't seen before. I think it's something that's more virulent than that, frankly.
Yeah. And I think what's really particularly interesting about it and what makes it so dangerous for Smith is that the movement it's got two things that are really toxic. It's got just a wacky basket of issues that come along with it, backwards looking stuff on COVID, like really far libertarian pieces that are not saleable with mainstream Albertans. And it's explicitly insinuating itself into party structures. Like, that's the part that's really, really weaponizes it and makes it, even if, because of course, depending on who you talk to in Alberta, either these folks are running the party or they're not that significant. But the reality is that if you have people sitting in official capacities within the party structures at every level, which is what they have now, there's going to be internal pull on that. And it's definitely a huge risk. There's a campaign within a campaign for the UCP.
Yeah.
I think I've said something like this before, but it's worth repeating, and you'll know why in a few seconds. I sometimes think of Canada as a cardigan. Yep, I said a cardigan. The 7 or 8 buttons up the front are our major urban centers, and the thousands of fibers that knit all of us together are our rural communities. We've been talking here about how to bring digital connectivity to 100% of our rural and Indigenous communities, and how, of all the providers, our presenting sponsor TELUS is the government's platinum partner on this. The leading advocates for our smaller places having the digital tools they need to thrive. More than words, Herle-Burleites, deeds. Let me give you just a couple of examples. The first is from the Caribou-Chilcotin region, a vast landscape of forests, fjords, peaks, and plains ranging across British Columbia from the Pacific coast to the Caribou Mountains. Ever been to places like Springhouse, Nimpo Lake, or Ulcacho First Nations Towdystan Lake 3? I'm guessing no. But TELUS has. Investing alongside the provincial government and ISED, they installed their last mile pure fiber into more than 1,200 homes and 15 small communities across the region, including 4 First Nations communities. And right now, in northern Alberta's Tall Cree First Nation, TELUS, in partnership with the CRTC, is building 2 new cellular sites and bringing wireless connectivity to over 300 households for the very first time. This is the good work that comes from partnering with ISED and the CRTC's broadband funds. So let's go over what we know. The government's target is to get Canada 100% connected by 2030. Yet the recent Auditor General's report points out, of the $1.5 billion in funding from ISED and the CRTC to meet that target, only about 25% has been spent so far. TELUS is just so keen to up the ante here, to work with all levels of government to help the funding flow faster and identify every opportunity to get every single one of our communities connected, to make the cardigan as beautiful and strong as can be. Go to telus.com/rural to learn more. So, something that really fascinated me is the arena deal last week. And so the various levels of government struck a deal with the Calgary Flames to build a new arena in Calgary. And there's a shitload of public money going into this between the provincial government and the city of Calgary. And, you know, it's a pre-election thing for Smith, and she thinks it's going to help her in Calgary to have this new arena. I am skeptical because my experience has been that people do not like subsidizing professional sports. And that when years and years ago, when the Canadian NHL teams were in real trouble because of the value of the dollar relative to the American dollar, John Manley, the industry minister, proposed a subsidy for NHL hockey teams and had to withdraw it within days because the public blowback was so strong. And I'm from Regina, and you know nobody loves their sports team more than people in Regina love the Saskatchewan Roughriders. But that new stadium was very controversial because of the amount of public money going into it. You can like the Saskatchewan Roughriders an awful lot and still not want your property tax bill to go up for the rest of your life to pay for a stadium you'll never be in. Yep. Right?
Totally.
And so I am skeptical that this works for Smith. What do you folks think?
I think it's a wild card. I think for sure it's not. I don't think it's the silver bullet that her campaign is maybe hoping it will be. It's one of those ideas you launch at the start of the campaign. It's primarily a trap for Notley. It's primarily designed to destabilize her and put her on the defensive and get her into a position of saying no, which she has sidestepped, and she has not said no because she's not, it's not her first rodeo. She knows how these things go. Has no interest in being on the wrong side of this issue. But I think Notley's going to wait and see how this plays out. My understanding is from the polling that people's views on the arena, it really greatly depends on how you ask the question. And I don't think a lot of people have really reflected deeply on it. So there's a chance that debate could turn in the way that you described.
But wait, there's an owner. Like in Regina, there isn't even an owner, okay?
Right.
In Regina, it's a community-owned thing. Here, it's like the two levels of government said,
right.
Murray Edwards, one of the richest people in Canada, here's $700 million.
And the other thing that's very strange about it is that also, to my understanding, is like they were pretty close to a deal already. And they would have only needed about $30 million to close the deal. So putting this amount of money on the table at this stage of the game, I'm not sure. I don't think it's an unequivocal win. I think it could blow back. But I think its main purpose, I'm not sure they're going to surf this one to the end of the election. I think it was a little bit of a landmine for Notley. That she's managed to dodge for the moment. But I don't know how it's going to play.
But come on, if your kid's school sucks, your kid's school sucks, and you see money going into this, aren't you pissed?
Well, I think also that there's a real risk that people could say, we want the arena, but we don't want this deal. We want the arena, but we don't want it, with this amount of public money or in this formulation. So there's a lot of opportunities for it to go off the rail, for sure.
It feels like small ball to me, or small puck, maybe. I don't know. Like there are big problems out there right now, including big problems in Alberta on a whole range of issues, and the arena that your local sports team plays in is not really in the same league as those other issues, whether it's the healthcare issues, whether it's resource issues, and what's going to happen with the energy sector going forward, and who's best positioned to defend it, etc. Like those are things that affect a lot more than your sports franchise. They affect your job or your access to healthcare, etc. So I don't know. I thought it was an odd issue to put in the window in that way, just because I've seen the same polling over time that you have, David. We dealt with this in the Harper years as well. We had Pierre Carl Pelledo and others coming cap in hand with grand designs for bringing the Nordiques back to Quebec City, etc. None of it plays well, at least nationally, in terms of the polling. Like I just think it's there's about a fifth of the people who are big sports fans out there, and they're very dedicated around those issues. But even with that group of people, you don't have a clear consensus around public money going into these arenas. So,
nor do conservatives, by the way. Like right. That's, I think there's an awkwardness there.
I think any notion that Alberta was a bastion of fiscal conservatism died in the Ralph Klein years and has never been resurrected. So I don't think the ideological piece of it really matters that much. But just as a crass political play, I don't know. I haven't seen a ton of polling on it. On this arena specifically, but I have trouble believing that it plays a hell of a lot different than every other arena in every other part of the country.
I agree. Hey, Kory, can I stick with you for a second? Because I want you to give Rachel Notley some advice. Because when I think about those Calgary voters that she's trying to get, I don't know much about them in detail in terms of what their concerns and priorities are. But I'm pretty sure they don't like Justin Trudeau.
Yeah.
Right? So how does she convince those voters that she doesn't like him as much as they don't like him?
Yeah, I don't know whether you are ever going to win that argument. I think and this is why I think she has a bigger challenge. She has to make a more nuanced pitch. I would say it's not about not liking Trudeau as much as it is saying that you're going to be the defender of the Alberta economy and that you have a plan to ensure that there's continued prosperity and employment in the energy sector, because the energy sector, even for all the people in Calgary who are not directly working for it, they're smart enough to understand that the value of their home and the number of businesses in their city and the number of services available, whether it's hospitals or other things, are all derived from the health of that foundational industry. And if Notley doesn't win, or at least fight to a draw, that notion that she can be a defender of those people and those jobs, and she loses the election, in my view. Now, I think she does have a narrative that she's employed in the past, and I think for certain voters, it sounds plausible. She's more capable of getting pipeline deals because, she can work better with other premiers and with the federal government and get approvals and, be an honest broker for the industry. Like, that's sort of the pitch. It's kind of similar to, what Mark Cameron's doing with Pathways or something like that, where you're selling a bit of an environmental message, but that is not mutually exclusive to the continuance of the sector. That's a tough, nuanced argument. Versus, the NDP want a just transition, and here's 20 clips of Notley saying just transition, and just transition means that you go on EI, and that she's her plan is to argue for a better EI payment for you than you would otherwise have. That's the tension, I think. It's a tough message, but
it feels soft to me.
Well, I just don't see how you avoid that as the central issue of the campaign. And this is why I think you see things leaning towards Smith. But you can't duck and hide or distract from an issue that's that central to an election campaign. You got to win on the economy, and we talked about this federally too. I think the same is going on right now between Trudeau and Poilievre. But you got to win on the economy. I just don't see any alternative to it. And so what would my advice be? It's you have to sharpen that message as much as you possibly can, and you've got to be poking holes in the viability of Smith's plan on the economy and on the energy sector, pointing out where it's not going to work, where it's naive, or where it's failing in one way or another. If you want to win that argument, and it's a very tough comms challenge, I think, for it to come through. But I don't see any way of avoiding it.
You know what I believe in? I believe in data. It's tempting in politics or in the corporate world to go by what your gut tells you, or by anecdotal evidence, or worst of all, what you want to believe. That's a good way to lose elections or run a business into the ground. Believe me, following what you want to believe can be a long, meandering tunnel that opens into bad outcomes. But data doesn't lie. It guides. A properly executed poll with a large sample, or productivity statistics, or historical performance figures, or meticulously collected safety records are precision tools for senior executives and policymakers who shape corporate and public policy. They made a really good sports movie about the advantages of acting on data. It's called Moneyball, and I highly recommend it. Our sponsor, CN, takes the Moneyball approach. It harvests data from across its vast network every day, using it to sharpen and polish operational safety, punctuality, and efficiency. CN's data includes multiple cargo records set in just the past year. What's my point here? Well, the federal government has decided to impose new rules on the country's railways, and that change has nothing to do with data. Ottawa is implementing something called extended interswitching. As I've explained here, that would force railways to deliver cargo to each other, handing off to the competition, back and forth, perhaps multiple times, from origin to destination. You couldn't find a better business disincentive. I repeat, there is no data to support the policy. Quite the opposite. It may be pleasing to a certain political constituency, but data has shown it will cause serious cargo delays, increase costs to railways, burden most shippers, and ultimately drive up costs for consumers. We know that because it's been tried before. These are days of inflation, sticker shock for grocery shoppers, travelers, motorists, and homeowners. Why impose a regulation that will just make things more expensive? CN has a simple suggestion for our federal government. Follow the data. Jordan, if I was running Smith's campaign, the Singh deal with Trudeau would be in my advertising. How should she respond to that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think they're going to use it exactly that same way. I think it's beneficial for when you back up and you remember that most UCP voters are with Smith despite her, not because of her. The very best thing that her campaign can do is keep her quiet, keep her hidden, and make the focus on Notley and where her allegiances lie on energy policy. And I think that the deal has been probably some of the most fruitful ground for Smith. If you look over the last 6 months, where she was able to gain the most traction and the most credibility, and really the longest stretch of undisturbed time, let's call it, by own goals, was when she was on the just transition beat, and she was using the confidence and supply agreement as a cudgel. So I think there's absolutely hay to be made to go back to that for her. But as we've talked about many times, it relies on a very tight discipline within her campaign that is challenging. There are other landmines out there, candidates, Smith's own behavior that are going to come. And so they need to be driving an advertising and a communications agenda that can just run over that stuff.
What does Notley say about Trudeau?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think she says a version of what she even, talked about during her time as premier, right? Like she is going to fight for a better deal. She has shown time and again also that she doesn't feel any particular allegiance to Singh, and she's quite happy to, in fact, use the division between them to demonstrate her bona fides to Albertans, that's the allegiance that comes first for her. So I'm actually not persuaded that that's an unproductive relationship. I think that Singh is perhaps a useful foil for Notley because it gives her a way to demonstrate how truly she's gonna stick on the sides of Albertans in that fight. I'm listening
to you both, and I'm telling you, it sounds like she's fucked on this issue.
Well, I mean, I think if it's the central issue of the campaign, as Kory said, yeah, that's not her favorable ground. But her campaign also needs to continue to work to hold the focus on things like healthcare, on things like schools and education, where we know that there's really high concern among Albertans about those services, and drawing again on the type of leadership that Albertans want. Do you want more chaos, or do you want an adult?
Well, that might be a better narrative. The chaos narrative might be a better narrative because you can tie it into some of those other things. But you know, I don't know. Short of attacking Singh directly over his deal with Trudeau, which I think has a lot of danger associated with it. I'm not sure how you parry that blow effectively. You know, it's not a very good narrative for her. I think, like, I don't know how you can attack your federal leader and distance yourself completely from that without getting sucked into you know, even deeper into that economic narrative in a way that is unhelpful to you. You know, the chaos narrative seems to me to be a better capstone where you can branch off to a few different things, whether it's education or healthcare or the economy, and try to dissipate the ballot question a little bit into something broader. But you know, these are all very tough challenges, not least very skilled communicators. So you know, I don't think this is a write-off by any means in terms of a campaign. I think it's going to be very close, but I do think she's been dealt a more difficult hand to play out here.
Okay, so it is going to be very close. I spent some time with Philippe Fournier's 308 website, and it looked at how close some of those ridings in Calgary really are based on the current numbers. And it led me to ask this question. I don't know if either one of you know, because when Rachel Notley was on the Herle Burley, she talked about how much they had worked organizationally in Calgary, how much they had focused on building candidates and riding organizations in Calgary. Who has the ground game? If these things are going to come down to a couple hundred votes, these ridings in this government, who's got the ground game?
Well, I would think that there's probably an edge towards Notley on that because you're leaning more on unions and some organization that is pre-existing, that's outside of your party apparatus. Plus, I think the UCP is being very distracted in knifing leaders and this sort of upheaval that we've seen around that. You know, there's organizing going on, but it seems to be more organizing circular firing squads than it has been organizing riding associations. So I wonder how effective all of that is going to be. Also, I'd say this, you know, nowhere in the country on the federal level, at least, is organization weaker than it is in Alberta. For the Conservative Party, which is counterintuitive. But, you know, when you think about it, it's maybe not so counterintuitive. In ridings where you
know,
win
in the
large
70s,
majorities, you don't have to campaign.
In the 70s, Kory, Quebec Liberal MPs would go on vacation when the election was called.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, leave the country and go on vacation when the election was called, because that was their break. They're working all year long as members of parliament. Election's coming. Hey, it's time to get a break. I'm sure that's what it's like to be a Conservative in rural Alberta.
Well, I love that energy.
Well, it is, and it used to be like that. It used to be like that in Calgary too. It's just that it isn't anymore. If you want to see good campaign teams, go to the 905 in Ontario. Go to the Lower Mainland, where you are scrapping for every single vote. Yeah. And that's where you see, you know, really well-run campaign organizations. I think it's fair to say that most of Alberta conservatives have never worked on a competitive election campaign. They don't have the first clue what to do in one.
So,
yeah, the only fights they're in are within their own party.
That's right. Yeah. Well, which are the most vicious, we all know. But, you know, just to build on what Kory's saying, you know, and I can't handicap the UCP ground game beyond what's publicly available, but I would also point to the internal fighting. That's never a good sign. That's a ton of energy poured inwards, which is not out connecting with voters. And in terms of the NDP, there's a slight underdog advantage, right? They have had 4 years. They knew the game was going to be in Calgary, and they have spent 4 years building and focusing their infrastructure in Calgary on getting just the right candidates, on building those teams. Those teams are not hitting the ground for the first time today. They have been out for months and months and months. And, the proof is in, like, donations are up. They've talked to 4 times as many people at this stage in the campaign than they had in 2019. So there's real muscle. You'll be seeing like 50,000 signs going up for the NDP today in Alberta. So they knew that this is where the fight is going to be, and they have used the time in opposition well to build towards that. And I would say that, New Democrats, this is one thing that across the country the party does very well. Party has an excellent ground game and has a really knowledgeable cadre of volunteers and campaign managers at the local level who will come in and run those things absolutely relentlessly. So I think that, if it comes down to a dogfight, as it likely will, for every last vote in Calgary, that's going to make just a massive difference. That you've had those teams out there that have been building to this for 4 years, and it's just a fine-tuned machine.
Well, who's running the NDP campaign, just quickly?
Brian Topp.
Brian Topp is. Okay, so it's Brian Topp versus Steve Forster?
Well, you couldn't ask for somebody better than Brian in terms of campaign management. I've got so much time for that guy. I wish he was not as good as he is, because he's defeated many conservatives in his day, and led a lot of really well run campaigns. Steve Outhouse is no slouch though either, and
Steve Outhouse,
he's
right, yeah.
And Steve's somebody who has come from parts of the country and run campaigns in parts of the country where you do have to be on your toes. So I think it's going to be a really interesting matchup between campaign teams and campaign leadership. I will say there's one other area where I'd give a slight edge to the NDP, and I think that's in sort of voter intensity, voter enthusiasm. I think what you see in a lot of the numbers for UCP is reluctant Smith voters. And reluctant voters are easy to target with negative ads to make them non-voters, where they just have to get their nails done that day, or they're a little too busy watching something on the television streaming service or whatever to go out and vote, because they just can't bring themselves to vote for somebody.
Are you telling a deep, dark secret that sometimes we run ads that aren't designed to get us votes, but are actually designed to suppress other parties' votes? Are you telling people that?
Surely not.
Is that not the purpose of all negative advertising? We got voter turnout to below 50% in the last provincial campaign. I'll note. So look, our political scientist professor Scott Reid isn't here to chastise me on how Machiavellian that is, but no, I think that's just standard fare, is it not?
It is. I'm just joking. It's going to be, I hope it's an interesting campaign. I think it is going to be an interesting campaign, and I hope personally that Danielle Smith is exciting as hell. But let's... I
think you're going to get your wish.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll be back to this next week. So, in the meantime, we have a clipping from the Toronto Star. Stephanie Levitz and Rob Benzie, I might humbly suggest that they were following up on our conversation of last week, wrote a fascinating TikTok about inside conservative circles about the Ford Poilievre relationship, and it was interesting reading. And here's a little excerpt. The Premier, a successful businessman who every day calls and texts dozens of people from all walks of life, has privately wondered why Poilievre is so right-wing and uncompromising on issues ranging from the pandemic response to economic development. Right-wing federal conservatives scoff, or an actual conservative? Some federal conservatives say that while Ford may lead a conservative party, they view him as a political opportunist content to bask in the celebrity aura of the Trudeau Liberals without caring about the foundational political principles of their ideology. Poilievre, they argue, would never do as Ford has done, boost program spending and run up massive budget deficits that eclipse those under his Liberal predecessor. I long for the fiscal restraint of Kathleen Wynne, joked one top federal conservative official. I've actually had these conversations about Ford with federal conservatives. some of them, senior people in Mr. Harper's administration. And I can confirm that they actually think this about Ford, that he's not a real conservative. And that, starting with many of the people from his outreach to Labour was an indication that he wasn't a real conservative. And so, Jordan, you've had some experience. Liberals don't, because we don't have any provincial wings anymore. But Liberals have had, New Democrats have had some experience with collisions between the federal and provincial wings. What are the impacts of this when the two wings of the party are divided from each other?
Well, it's always awkward, that's for sure. And, the depth of the division makes a big difference. I think that there are moments when those divisions and those fights are played out primarily for a public audience. And in the back rooms, there remains good communication. This, for the Conservatives, this doesn't seem to me to be one of those moments. I think there is a genuine divide here because really what you're seeing, it's an ideological split. And, as as Kory will affirm, on the right and the left, those can be certainly the most passionate. And I think one of the reasons why this is something that federal Conservatives feel strongly about, or some federal Conservatives feel so strongly about, is I think there's a twinge of jealousy in there because, to be very frank, Ford's approach is quite successful, and his ideological flexibility, his approach that is really just true populism on many levels, and his focus on putting forward arguments and cases in his very best iterations that are really very saleable to the working class is something that the federal Conservatives haven't nailed. And on the flip side of the coin, I think Pierre Poilievre historically has had a real ideological rigidity around some of these issues that creates some difficult and awkward circumstances for him. And actually, we're going to talk more about PSAC and the strike later on, but this is a really excellent example of that. And his inability to really have a strong position on the Volkswagen deal is also another example of this. Ideologically, the federal Conservatives are far more rigid, and it has trapped them into a little bit of a corner, whereas Ford provincially, because Ford just does what his gut and Kory's polling tells him to do. There's a lot more flexibility, and his personal brand is one that allows that flexibility because he can change his mind. He can remain true to those values that people like in him, his connection to everyday people. And that it gives him that opportunity to maneuver. And Pierre Poilievre doesn't benefit from that. That's not his strength. So I hear the complaining, and to me, it's got a bit of a loser ring to it on the federal side. I think that there's a lot of lessons that the federal Conservatives could draw from Ford to shore up some weak points in their own offer to voters.
Well, if you can't point to victory at the ballot box, then I guess you got to lean on ideology as the case that you're making, right? To
certainly our experience as New Democrats
maintain internal unity. I think there's something to that. But look, I think there's a long history of this between the provincial party in Ontario and the federal party. There was tons of tension. Going way back to the Mulroney era between the Big Blue machine of Bill Davis and Mulroney Conservatives federally. You saw a similar tension between Mike Harris and Jean Charest back in the mid and late 90s, where it was viewed by the federal Conservatives that Harris was leaning too much towards Preston Manning and the Reform Party, and that was somehow treasonous. And so, you've seen these sorts of things go on and on. There was never any great love between Tim Hudak and Prime Minister Harper, if you're looking during the McGuinty years. So this has always been a feature. So insofar as there's one now, I don't think it's any big news flash. It's always sort of been playing itself out. I think Jordan touched on really the main points of where the differentiation is in terms of substance. Ford is a conservative populist, and he, if you were to say who is he more like, He's more like Ralph Klein or Brad Wall. Somebody who will sometimes do some things that are offside with the ideological canon of conservatism as laid out by, I don't know who's supposed to speak for them. Is it Andrew Coyne, who usually articulates these things in columns and then never votes for the Conservative Party? I don't know. Like there are a number of people who will lay out a case as to that someone who is a populist conservative is offside with what a true conservative should be. Sure, whatever. That is fucking crybaby stuff, if you ask me. At the end of the day, the purpose of politics is to actually form government and to lead a province or a federal government as premier or as prime minister. It's not to as the NDP have often found themselves, be hectoring from the sidelines with self-righteous indignation about this ideology or that ideology. I just don't think there's any upside in doing that. I think most conservatives want to see their party in government, and they're willing to make some compromises along the way in order to achieve that, because they'll view that as a better outcome than having the Liberals in charge, propped up by the NDP. So I don't know. Anyway, I think it's part of the natural way things go between the Ontario level of government and the federal level of government. But it is what it is.
Well, listen, it is it is unquestionably that. There's always that kind of stuff that goes on, and it takes two to tango. I mean, if there was still a Liberal Party, people in Ontario would be outraged about how friendly Trudeau and Ford are, because it doesn't help the provincial Liberals one whit that Trudeau looks like he thinks the Ford government is just fine, right? But to me, this goes right to the core of the problem that I believe the Conservative Party has federally, which is too much dominated by Alberta thinking and not enough by Ontario thinking in order to win. And you have made the point that Ford and Trudeau win the same voters, many of the same voters, right? Yeah. And so when Bill Davis was winning Ontario and Pierre Trudeau was winning Ontario, they were winning the same seats and winning over the same voters. And they were fine with each other. Trudeau had no interest in getting, and the Western Conservatives thought that Davis was a sellout. Well, that's the difference between Ontario and Alberta. The things that sell in Alberta don't sell in Ontario. It's a more moderate place. And you got to get those moderate people that don't want a lot of upheaval and to vote with you. And so to me, the fact that the federal Conservatives are saying that Ford isn't ideological enough is one of the best signals I've heard that they're still going to have trouble winning Ontario in the next election.
Yeah, I think this tells us just frankly far more about what's going on inside Poilievre's office than anything else. And if this is their line of thinking, then as a progressive, I'm quite hopeful, because this is loser talk for them. And if they are digging deeper into the negatives that Poilievre has, where he absolutely has trouble connecting, for example, with suburban women, because of some of these chunks of ideological rigidity that are, and the idea as well that there's sort of this pipeline of rejected staff and candidates and so on from the provincial Conservatives that somehow magically find a home federally. Like this is not good, because your internal culture then becomes dominated by that chip on people's shoulder. And I think, from my perspective, if they continue down this road, I think that's great, because they're tying themselves up in knots internally about whether, what kind of offer, for example, they're going to make to working class voters. And that's great. That's great for the NDP.
Well, you're seeing some of this playing out in some of the candidate selection. People like Jamil Javani or Roman Baber running for the federal party. I hope they lose their nomination meetings, because the Ford government won those seats and did well because it expelled those folks from the party, not because they ran for them. And that's and I think this is what it comes down to. There's for those who think that the Ford government isn't conservative enough, I challenge them to take a look at the numbers in the polling and ask this question: Is the problem Ford, or is the problem the voters? And the voters are not conservative enough, or the right complexion of conservatism that you would like them to be. And, hectoring at Doug Ford doesn't change the complexion of the voters that he's appealing to. It really, at the end of the day, you got to be looking at it from, what is your electoral coalition? Who are you bringing in? And like, there aren't these mythical, people from Red Deer and Lethbridge and Vegreville that are just living in the suburbs of Toronto that didn't know that there was a Conservative Party on the ballot, and they've just been hiding, waiting for that to be shown to them. Like, these people don't exist. So you gotta campaign to the people who actually live in the riding.
As a Liberal, I want both of you other two parties to keep losing on the basis of principle and ideology while we gracefully slide up the middle on whatever is the soup du jour.
Well, everybody has a price, David. The Liberals is always so low.
All right. Just to wrap up quickly, apparently PSAC and the government settled last night, and the Treasury Board strike is now over. They got that strike over before anybody outside of downtown Ottawa knew it was on. It's good. Tax collectors, I think, are still out of work.
Yeah, they're still on strike.
Yeah.
Hopefully forever. But
for anybody listening, the filing deadline did not change. Public service announcement.
There was some give by the government on money, but none on remote work. And Jordan, are there any ramifications of this we should note?
Yeah, so I think so. The deal seems to me to be a bit peace with honor. Everybody came out with something, which is always the hallmark of a good deal. So the initial offer from the government was 9% over 3 years. The union came out with 12.6 over 4, plus a $2,500 signing bonus. So they get to go back with a pretty sizable increase for their members, as well as a longer deal, and the government gets to say that they sort of held to their overall target. There is a little progress on remote work, some language there about managers now dealing with that on an individual level, which I think will make a lot of people pretty happy. But I would say the overall takeaway... But it's not
in the contract, which would have meant it was right. an irregular bargaining thing.
That's right. That's right. So I'd say some progress. There was no movement on remote work, and this one, will have ramifications outside. And I would say really the takeaway for me on the strike is a few things. So a lot of people inside the bubble really predicted that the strike was going to fail. It was going to fizzle quickly, that there wasn't going to be support within the union for it among members, that the public would turn against it, and none of these things proved to be true. So I think that those are some interesting takeaways. You actually had the public coming along with the union and with the demands, in large part, I think, because people are looking for wage increases and greater flexibility in work in their own lives. And so this is a trend, I think, for parties to watch. And I know that there's some polling out in the field this week that's going to hopefully illuminate some of these issues a little bit more, and I'll be really interested to see that. And then the other thing is that I think we did see that there was a greater willingness on the part of union members to go out and show up on those picket lines and stick with this until there was some sizable movement on the part of the government. We have had a long
Labor's feeling some mojo, aren't they?
That's right. We've had a long era of labor peace in Canada, but I think that time is coming to an end. People are really feeling a serious pinch from inflation, and there's an increased engagement and even militancy on the part of union members all across the country. And for those who are not unionized, we're seeing this as well, cut down across generational levels, that there is really high support for the demands of organized labor. We're seeing that younger workers are no longer putting up with subpar working conditions. They're voting with their feet. This is the whole quiet quitting thing. And really, I think that this does signal there's a change happening, and it's something that all employers and all political parties really have to keep an eye on. Quality of work and wages is not an issue that's going away anytime soon, and workers are feeling very empowered. And this deal, they the government was not able to keep the trend of 9% deal that they have with AFCO and with IBEW. So that break in that pattern is significant for other negotiations that are going to be happening. And those gains, I think, are gonna echo out more broadly for Canadians. And in terms of the government, so I think, I'm not sure the Liberals are really going to get much credit for resolving this because Trudeau stayed well away from it. He didn't put his personal stamp on this at any point, despite outside pressure to get involved. And maybe at the end of the day, they were closer than they appeared to a deal, and that might have been the right call. And I think that an important thing to watch will be any outstanding backlogs that come from this work disruption to make sure that those are resolved quickly so that there's not service hiccups that lend more credence to conservative arguments that Canada is broken. So I think the government has to be watchful about that as things resolve. But overall, I think this has been a really good May Day for Canadian workers, unionized or not. And I think that the ramifications of this deal are going to be significant as we move ahead.
Hey, Kory, do you think it sets the benchmark for wage settlements now? It's somewhere between 3% and 4%?
No, I don't. I think what this was about was the desire to get people back at the office more than money. I think they paid a premium in order to get that outcome. But I think it was a smart decision to do so, because I think if they hadn't won on the remote work thing, you'd never change it. It would be remote work forever. And I think the government knew that. They had one, there'll be many times at bat on wages, again and again and again, a contract after contract, but there's only one at bat on coming back to the office, and it was this time. And I think they need to pay a premium in order to get that outcome, and that's what they did. So I think this is on the high side of what you're going to see other wage settlements be. And I think the quid pro quo was get people back at the office.
All right. Good enough. Listen, thank you for doing this. It's been a ton of fun. Let's do our Hey Yous. Mr. Pinsent, would you care to ring us in?
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The Hey Yous are about to begin.
All right. Who's got a Hey You today?
Well, I got a Hey You. We already touched on it a little bit earlier, but my Hey You is going out to Brian and to the entire Alberta NDP campaign team. This is going to be the campaign of a lifetime. And it is just so exciting for all of us political folks and all of us watchers. And it's so significant also. So this is going to be just the most intense 29 days that are coming up. And a hey you to everybody who, and frankly, everybody for every party, who's putting their life on hold, their family on hold, trucking across the country to do this work, because it matters and it's going to be one that you are going to tell your kids about. So my particular hey you goes out to the Alberta NDP team and Brian, wishing you wisdom, tenacity, and all the very best of luck as you move ahead.
Excellent. Good stuff. Kory?
Well, I'm going to do a hey you to my good friend and our collective former colleague, Jenny Byrne, to wish her well as she's dealing with all of these nominations that are coming up federally. We touched on it earlier. There's a different approach at the federal level on this. It's maybe a little bit more democratic in nature in terms of allowing a broader section of people to run and less control in the hands of campaign teams in terms of who's allowed to run and who isn't, et cetera. So I'm doing a hey you, Jenny, thinking about you. This is going to be a tough job. And
you should send wine, Kory. He needs wine.
But I know Jenny very well, and I have a high degree of confidence in her ability to navigate through all of that. But anyway, hey you, Jenny, thinking about all the fun you're going to be having doing that.
There you go. Cameo appearance for Jenny Byrne on The Curse of Politics. She's back. My hey you goes out to President Joe Biden, who announced he's going to be running again. And I think it's really, really a mistake. And I obviously don't wish you ill. And I hope that your health is good. But it feels to me that assuming that you will be a strong candidate 18 months from now is a really, really high risk proposition. And the notion that only you could beat Trump is, I think, hubris and the kind of arrogance that comes from being in office and thinking only you could do it. There should be a full race. Somebody in the Democratic Party would emerge. Need a generational break in that country anyway. And frankly, I think, Mr. Biden, after having had a pretty successful couple of years, you've now put the whole project at risk. There's my hey you. I want to thank you two for being here today, and fuck Reid, but thank you two for being here today. Thank everybody who watched and listened, and I'd like to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and our sponsor, CN Rail. And we'll see you all next week with more Curse of Politics and presumably Reid.